I'd like to introduce Marcel Arsenault. Marcel is a co-founder of One Earth Future, as well as the Arsenault Family Foundation and the Secure World Foundation. Through these foundations, Marcel pursues his passion of promoting systems of governance which prevent war. Marcel served as a board member for MARC for 5 years. His achievements have won him numerous awards, including the Conservation Award for his participation in open space projects in Boulder, Colorado, and the Distinguished Stephen B. Hart from Colorado Historical Society for restoring the Tabo Residence and the Tabo Grand Hotel in Lakeville. He was also vice chair of EcoCycle Boulder, one of the earliest and largest nonprofit recycling organizations in the United States. As founder of Real Capital Solutions, Marcel oversees a portfolio exceeding 1.5 billion in real estate assets. He has developed numerous presentations to various universities and real estate organizations. He has authored several articles on real estate, including one academic publication, and is a contributing author of How to Build a Real Estate Empire. He has earned a Bachelor of Science degree from McGill University and was working towards a PhD in molecular biology from the University of Colorado when he started his career as an entrepreneur. In your space, welcome so much, Marcel. We're very excited to have you. You are a visionary and leader in philanthropy. So my first question to you, Marcel, is philanthropy for global governance has to balance big issues with both a global perspective and a local impact. How have you addressed this tension in your philanthropy?
Thank you, Maria, and thank you for that amazing introduction of our guests. Well, I'd like to begin with an example. At One Earth Future, about 10 years ago, we started working with the UN contact group on global piracy. And so with the UN, I interviewed young pirates in Somali prisons. And when we interviewed them, we asked them for their advice. What can we do as a global organization to try to keep more young men from becoming pirates? And what they said, I'll never forget. They said that if you want other young men in Somalia not to follow us, you have to create hope and jobs for the locals. These young men were right. We went back and thought about it, and we discovered that, in fact, it's important to deliver on-the-ground solutions. It isn't enough to have a grand vision. There's obviously a tension when working on big problems. Solving a big problem requires solving all of the root causes, and to try to do so together, it's not easy. The program work that you select has to be narrow, and it also has to deliver measurable impact. Today, the idea of robust coordination among all sectors of society it's becoming mainstream, right? We believe now that government, civil society, international global organizations, and even business is at the table working cooperatively on many of these issues. For example, in piracy, the businesses showed up, and they were a very important supporter of the entire initiative. And it was when they put guards on boats that really helped. But they also went on the ground and did what we did to try to help the young men get jobs so that they had a future. So you have to balance the big issue like piracy with the idea of delivering local impact like jobs. You have to form the link, and then in our view, it's like building blocks. The local impact has to build, and it has to build into a systemic impact. One effort, in effect, nests into the next. So we believe that with the right building blocks and using the right architecture, you can build a global solution. But the solutions at the core, they need to be implemented locally by the stakeholders. So it isn't enough for the global community to complain about piracy. They have to get on the ground, find out what the root source is, and try to cure the problem at the root source. Those of us who have the resources and the vision, we're part of the solution. But frankly, we don't have the solution. We don't own the solution. So at the core, it's the locals in Somalia that really own the solution. Otherwise, the navies will be there forever, and we'll end up with a dysfunctional solution. But if you get the architecture and the design right, we believe that local problem solving builds into a sustainable, peaceful world. Today, all of our programs have the same idea, that we go local, we don't just go global. There needs to be an alignment between the international donors, national governments, local actors in the developing world. Today, we have a great program in Somalia. It's called the Shirako program. Shirako means partner in Somali. And we partner with Norway, Denmark, the EU, and one of our sister foundations, the Arsenault Family Foundation. And what we do is help finance businesses. These businesses do solar, they do fishing, they raise chickens. There's women who have businesses making jewelry. There's all sorts of businesses that we finance. And these businesses, basically create jobs and an opportunity so that the violence in Somalia doesn't perpetuate. Similarly, in Colombia, we work with several universities. We work with the Colombian government, local governments, and several UN initiatives. We also embrace the idea of iterative problem solving. Unfortunately, when you get on the ground, you discover the world operates completely different than you thought it might, or perhaps than you thought it should. But when you get on the ground with a global question, you have to figure out how to add value and how that fits into the global question. And above all, I think you need to be patient and learn. I remember 10 years ago giving a talk at the UN at the Piracy Contact Group. And I remember saying that I had good news and bad news because it was right after the Great Recession. I said, the good news is it isn't going to cost much money to help solve the problem in Somalia. But the bad news is it's going to take a very long time. So we have to be patient and we have to help the Somalis rebuild their society. And that's the way you eliminate the problem. Frankly, when we started, we ran, what you might call a bank. We had some very, very good employees. They were all Somali. We got them from all over the world. But on a cost basis, we ran what I call the dumbest bank in the world. Our overhead was extremely high compared to our loan book. But we were patient and we knew that eventually we'd get enough loans out there and we'd get enough partners that it would start to balance. And today, 10 years later, I'm happy to report that our systems work very well. And indeed, they're getting better every year. So that's the local part of it. We're at Shirako, we're getting close to covering our overhead. So I think in summary, you start with a global problem, but you hold yourself accountable for short-term measurable results. So we have to understand that solutions aren't sustainable unless they're both globally sustainable and locally sustainable. And frankly, I have to admit that getting that formula right is not easy.
Marcel, I would like to ask you again around this, how can multi-stakeholder partnerships, such as developed by the OEF in this forum, increase your impact and success?
Thank you, Maria. Well, as the other panelists, Sandra, Jens, James, have alluded to, philanthropy is a very small player. And we embrace the idea that no single organization can manage the complexity of our modern multipolar world. As you were saying, Jens, there's an architectural gap. We call it the missing architecture of global governance. We're all collectively trying to put pieces in place. But it isn't just, it's very, very difficult to do because all of these problems are enormously complex. We do a lot of research. We have a research department, and we find that many of them are actually contributors one to the other. So you end up with this network of problems that creates a large meta problem. And you have to go down to the roots, but all of the roots are individual and many of them contribute in very complex ways. So it's not really easy at all to figure out how to go forward. It's very much, we call it a Braille process of figuring out what the governance should be. But, we all have to admit there's a modern multipolar world. Sandra, as you were saying, even the question of wealth is on the table. There's so many questions that are very, very complex that we have to sort out. The other thing that we're cognizant of, and this relates to what you were saying, Sandra, is we're a small foundation relative to the big foundations. No one, not even the Gates Foundation, has enough money to solve these problems. Even the most wealthy in the world, their wealth would not probably solve any of these problems alone, certainly not without the cooperation and the engagement and the legitimacy of others. So we have, we're bimodal in this. We work on very specific problems, as you do, Jim, in your foundation. You know, what are you going to pick? What are you going to try to contribute to? So you got to add value. We use the expression utility matters. The world will figure it out. I love the quote from Churchill. He said that the Americans, we can trust the Americans to do the right thing, but only after they've done everything else. Well, we're somewhere on the everything else list, to be honest, working our way to the right thing. And it's not just the Americans, we all do it as humans. These are enormously complex problems. And so we know that we have to engage multi-stakeholders. So on one hand, we want to focus and make a real contribution. And on the other hand, we have to engage stakeholders, and it ain't easy. We're not even sure who to talk to. We have one in our values, we talk about engaged stakeholders. They really own it. We regard as philanthropists, we call ourselves catalysts. And if those of you who know, biochemical or chemical reactions, understand the catalyst isn't very important. It just helps the substrates change. So we regard our role as somewhat catalytic. But when you talk about multi-stakeholder partnerships, each sector of society should focus basically on what they do well, so that we don't get into each other's lanes. For example, the private sector, we think it's a very important contributor to the future of the world. It'll either be a good contributor or a bad contributor, and probably both. And you need to work with them. You understand what they can bring to the table, both positive and negative, and they're at the table whether we like it or not. Clearly, in a good world, they provide economic sustainability, and they provide the economic power and the efficiency to solve the problems. So we think business needs to be at the table. And just as an example, as we sit here today, we're all aware that there are biotech companies that are private enterprises all over the world working, and we're in touch with some of them, working day and night to try to bring a series of COVID vaccines. So there's a very positive contribution. And in Somalia, we work with a lot of alternative energy companies that are out there installing solar, wind, and battery power so that these small villages can be connected to the real world, and young girls and boys can read in the evening and learn because they have light. So civil society, in our view, provides the initiatives that work at a local level. And again, it's not our ideas. We have to contribute clearly, but as a catalyst, it's the substrates that matter. So we regard ourselves as people that are obligated to bring proof of concept. You know, we have to show that something works, and after we show that it works, we're very hopeful that governments will wake up and say, gee, this now works, and it will help us scale the resources. And we find that that's indeed the truth, that if you have something that works, others will follow. That's the reason we all have cell phones. They work. Utility matters. So if you can trust humans to do something, they'll follow their utility. And so our job is to, as philanthropists, is to get out there and prove that something that's complex can be made better and better, just as Open Society is doing with the ICC. Obviously it ain't working well, but what the heck, new things usually don't work well for a long time. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of advocacy to get it on the right track and get it efficient. So, we feel that we're much too small to have a major impact on our own. We call ourselves venture capital philanthropists. We get out there and do things, with a For example, the revolutionaries, the retiring revolutionaries in Colombia, get them jobs. That's what they want. They want to come back into society. And if you don't bring them back in, guess what? You're going to have a lot of people with arms that know how to shoot. And that's not really what you want. So you need to work with a lot of partners, and indeed we do. Another example of partnership that we've done is collaboration on secure fisheries. Again, that's an organization that we mounted an initiative in Somalia. They're working with the Global Cold Chain Alliance and the governments of Somalia, several of them, as we all know. There's competing governments in Somalia, and we work with them all. And they're trying to catalyze the development of refrigerated supply chains so that Somalia's important fishing sector, they're one of the best fishing sectors in the world. Some people believe that's why piracy started, because, you know, a whole bunch of countries came in and started stealing the fish from Somali waters. The Somalis got angry and took over some of the boats, and that became a business model called piracy. But anyway, our initiative, Secure Fisheries, has spent 3 years developing the cooperative management principles around Somali fisheries. So on the ground, you know, we have a number of locals, and we work with the stakeholders to build trust networks for the local fisher people, the government, and the donors. This creates an efficiency that now the private sector can come in, because from relative chaos is sort of an organized supply chain. And so, you know, buyers can come in and bring the product to Ethiopia, thus creating jobs in Somalia and allowing them to take control of their own destiny and their own resources. So our view is, of course, you know, if you can solve these problems at a local level, they're going to cascade or build up into rational architecture. And by the way, we think they own the architecture. It ain't ours, it's theirs. We wouldn't want them coming to America telling us how to do things. It's a very interesting thought. I don't know why philanthropists are stuck with this idea and believe that the idea translates down to somebody who lives in an entirely different world. By the way, it was one of those. I was disavowed of it. I learned when I got on the ground, there was an entirely different reality. And by the way, it's really quite beautiful. The reality that they have is different than the one I grew up in Northern Canada, but it's equally relevant, and it works very well if you understand their rules. So you just capture their rules, you honor what they do. All of our loans are done, they're Sharia compliant, it's a Muslim country. We have no problem with that. But people all over the world will honor each other if you do the right thing. But I think in the end, partnership needs to be inclusive. And if I had any advice to the people here, most of us come from civil society. But I would advise that we keep an eye on business, and not just the negative part of business, but the positive part. Business doesn't know where the hell the world's going. I can promise you that. They don't know. They don't have a clue. They're worried, they're engaged. And I think for the most part, business is run by decent people that want to do the right thing. It's not a big part of their mandate, number one, and nobody's talked to them about exactly how to do it. But I think they're extraordinary partners if you can capture them. So that'd be my concluding thought. Don't forget business. They deserve to be at the table with us. Thank you.
How do you see the best path forward for philanthropy and global governance? Which issues or geographies resonate most areas where we need to focus on our joint energy and create outside systemic change? What might the obstacles or bright spots be? And also just share with us an example from today and beyond UN75 to the future we want and the UN we need. So Marcel, I'll kick it up to you.
Oh, thank you. I'll try to be brief so that we can get some good questions. Thank you, Maria. Well, I think as we're suggesting here, the world needs to confront the reality that we're facing. Many new challenges that humanity has not seen, except in the last 75 years: nuclear weapons, climate change, and recently COVID-19. The problem is, in reality, as you were saying, Jens, there's no one in charge. I like to say 7 billion people, no plan. That's the situation. The nation state works pretty well. as you try to coordinate the silos, you end up not with complexity. Well, you do get complexity, by the way, but you also get dysfunction. And we're working our way through that. You know, as some of us have alluded, we all share the same language, it appears. We call that the missing global architecture, and it needs to be built. Nobody owns it. It has to be built collectively, and it has to have legitimacy. At the end of the day, no one is empowered. But I believe, as some of us are saying, that had we had a great system in place, COVID-19 could have been stopped in its tracks. We did not. A number of philanthropists called this out. Our own shop did about 10 years ago. We abandoned the effort because there was very little interest from multilateral institutions, from nations, from anything. And we just felt that it was lonely work, and humanity was condemned to experience the problem first and then perhaps wake up. So that was our conclusion. And in the end, I think we'll get this fixed, by the way. But the thing that's really sad is that we could have had it fixed if we had great global systems in place that anticipated it and had plans in place and resources, properly resourced it. So perhaps, as you're saying, Sandra, perhaps we can derive lessons from this. I'm afraid the lessons could go either way. The heck with everybody else, there's a fair amount of that going on. You know, we're going to do it alone. Or the other one is, oh my goodness, it looks like this little virus has no favorites. Their favorite is a human body. That's what their favorite is. And they'll go anywhere. That's pretty clear. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that we certainly can't solve these problems as philanthropists, but I think we can bring the questions to the table. We can challenge the nation states, which I think we can do and should do. What are you not doing? Why are you not collectivizing? Why are you not coming up with solutions? Mm-hmm. And philanthropy has one thing that we've noticed. It has the ability to look at problems from the perspective of the problem. As you were saying, Jens, when you're a politician, you're not allowed to look at the problem. You have to look at the problem from the nation state standpoint. It's their money. That's how you're looking at it. The problem is the virus doesn't respect borders. So, you know, you no longer can look at the problem from a nation state standpoint and be done. Obviously, you got to fill in that global architecture. Who's going to be responsible for it? Where do we get the resources? How do we get ahead of this so that we're not condemned to suffer the consequences again and again? I think we'll get it right. But the architecture that we do have is clearly at this point somewhat unreliable. We all agree. James, your comment on the ICC makes that point very well. But it doesn't absolve us of the obligation of trying to create this architecture, do it experimentally, do it collectively. It'll be an ugly process, but I'm reminded that democracy was an ugly process that took hundreds and hundreds of years. So with the UN, we need to be patient. We need to understand that humanity is going through a transition. Our job is to help visualize and help lead and to challenge our stakeholders. If a critical mass of global philanthropists can align behind certain principles, I think we can, as we say, we can fight above our weight. We can have a little bit more of an impact. So I think global governance will have to evolve and iterate its way forward along with the rest of humanity. But in closing, I'd say the UN was formed around a wonderful vision of a peaceful, prosperous world where the nations come together and govern collectively. Clearly, the work is incomplete, and clearly the nations have not are not perhaps in the alliance we would like them to be in that goal. But by the 100th anniversary, another 25 years, I hope we will find a more peaceful, prosperous, and integrated world. And as philanthropists, I think we all enjoy the privilege to be part of it.
So to our audience, we have not forgotten about you. We have a couple of questions for you, the panelists. So this first question for you, Marcel, from the audience is, what can either the UN or philanthropists do to improve effective partnerships between global philanthropy and UN goals and programs?
Yes, well, I think learn to work together. The UN agencies are relatively complex. I think it would be good if the UN agency sort of had a small partner program to work with local NGOs, and perhaps suspended some of the rules that were made. In large organizations, it's necessary to have a lot of rules, but the way you can get around that is by having local ombudsmen. So in the US, they have an organization called the Small Business Association, and it's a semi-government agency, but it does a very effective job of reaching out to small businesses. So that's one of the things I think the UN should consider, because it's a very large organization, a very complex organization. And I think they need to also go down to the people to reach down. So that'd be one thing I'd recommend. And as philanthropists, obviously, as Sandra was saying, we need to pick what we're going to work on. There's so much need out there on all of these issues that, you need to forgive the philanthropists if they decide to be focused, because that's the way they can have impact. So I think the public being a little, if you will, a little understanding of the fact that philanthropists are going to try to specialize and are going to try to work where they can add value. I think that'll be very helpful. And try to find a philanthropist that is on the same page as you, that really believes what you believe, because that's the beginning of all partnerships, right? Is a congruence of philosophy. And then at that point in time, I believe that you need to add value, whoever you are. Just because you have money doesn't absolve you. In fact, it's probably, frankly, a little bit of a curse when you think about it, because now you have an enormous responsibility that others are free of, because you got all this money you're supposed to do the right thing with. So I think finding philanthropy that thinks the way you do a little bit of searching, partner with them, and by all means add value. Try to figure out how you can go from A to B and prove on a small basis that what you're doing works, so that you can attract intelligent people, you can attract capital. That'd be my recommendation.
I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, the panelists, for this amazing conversation. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to the audience for the questions. Thank you so much. And I hope, as Marcel says, after 25 years, when we have this discussion, we will have a different agenda and a different way of thinking and a better world and a better UN. Have a good day where you're all calling in from. I'm calling in from Baltimore, the greatest city in the United States of America. Wishing you all a lovely day, evening. Bye.